لساني يفقه قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, today is the third talk on the life of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. And in last week's talk, we talked about his own acceptance of Islam, how he came to Islam. And I briefly talked about that, unlike many people think of him as if he just accepted Islam without understanding. Just Rasulullah came, and for him that was sufficient that he's a good friend of his and he knows him for a long period of time. Rather, there was a long process that he went through prior to Muhammad was appointed as a prophet. He was already looking for the truth. He already rejected polytheism, idol worshipping, and he met people who hinted him towards coming of a prophet from the Arabs, from the tribe he was from, as a matter of fact, from the Quraysh. So he was already expecting, he had already thought through it, he already was looking for, in a way, that how to worship the true creator. So hence when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when he proclaimed to be a prophet as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him to, it was very easy for him to get into Islam. Now, let me talk about who was the first person who came to Islam. There are different reports, historians differ. And one thing that in general is accepted by all is Khadija radiallahu anha was the first person who accepted Islam. Now after that, whether it was Ali or Zayd or Abu Bakr radiallahu anhum, there are different opinions about that. But it can be said this way, and this is how Ibn Kathir talked about it. He said that when it comes to the first woman, the first person who came to Islam was Khadija. And then the first child who came to follow Islam was Ali radiallahu anhu. And first freed slave was Zayd bin al-Haritha radiallahu anhu. And the first freed man who entered to follow Islam was Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. So that's about his acceptance of Islam and the order he came to follow Islam. Then we talked about not only he became Muslim and he kept it to himself, rather he started calling people towards Islam, and he was the source of some of the greatest Sahaba who entered to follow Islam because of his work. And among them, 6 of them were the ones who were from the 10 who were promised the Jannah. Yeah? Uthman bin Affan, Abdul Rahman bin Auf, Sa'ad bin Abi Waqas, Zubayr bin Awwam, Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah, and Talha bin Ubaidullah. So these 6 came to follow Islam through the efforts of Abu Bakr Siddiq. And very short period of time after he became Muslim. Now, there is a lot of huge reward for bringing somebody into fold of Islam. So you can imagine Abu Bakr was a source of these giants, if you want to call them. So how much of a blessing that he received, and how blessed him and his family was, as we talked about previously as well. Abu Bakr Siddiq, he had 3 daughters. All 3 of them were married to the people of Jannah. Aisha radiallahu anha married to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of course. And then Asma bint Abi Bakr was married to Zubayr bin Awwam, and Kulthum married to Talha bin Ubaidullah radiallahu anhu ajma'in. Now, also his blessed family can be looked at from the angle of that he is the only Sahabi who had 4 generations. His parents, himself, his children, and his grandchildren who were from the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Meaning, they saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they lived around Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the state of Islam. Now, and they died as Muslims as well, of course. Then we talked about some of the trials and tribulations that he went through, and how persevered he was in going through those hardships that he went through. And then we talked about some of the lessons that we learned from it. One was his perseverance. Then we talked about the sister of Umar al-Khattab, who Jamil, when Abu Bakr sent his mother, al-Khair, to find out about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam situation. And Jamil, she knew that Jamil was not al-Khair, mother of Abu Bakr, was not a Muslim. So she did not disclose know about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam Rather, she said, take me to Abu Bakr. And when she went to Abu Bakr, then Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he started asking Jamil about how Rasulullah was doing, the incident that happened, that he could have been harmed as well. So he was very worried about Rasulullah, even though Abu Bakr was harmed in a very severe way. The way he was harmed, that his face, you cannot tell where the nose was. That much he was kicked by one of the kuffar of the Mecca, Rabi'a, I forgot the name. But, so now, so even that situation. And then when Jamil, she did not want to talk to Abu Bakr in front of al-Khair, the mother of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, so he said, it's okay. And then she disclosed that Rasulullah was okay, and then she took him to Rasulullah in that state that he was in. And even at that time, when the mother went with Abu Bakr was very worried about his mother. And he asked Rasulullah to call his mother towards Islam. And alhamdulillah, his mother entered the fold of Islam because of Abu Bakr as well at that time. Now, there's another lesson that we learned from that was, when Abu Bakr was beaten up by the Meccans at that time, what we see is his tribe entered and Banu Taym, and they wanted to protect Abu Bakr Siddiq. And they said they were going to kill the one who harmed Abu Bakr Siddiq. They were including his father as well, Abu Quhafa, who was not a Muslim even. So it was not the issue for them whether you're a Muslim or not. If you're part of a tribe, tribalism was at the peak at that time. Yeah? So the people were divided by their tribes. Okay. Now today, inshallah, we'll talk about how he defended Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he spent his wealth in freeing the slaves. And at one point, Abu Bakr tried to migrate, as many other people who were migrating to Habasha because of the persecution. And how Ibn Daghina, he prevented Abu Bakr to leave Mecca. And then he was engaged with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to carry the da'wah of Islam to other tribes. And we'll talk about this briefly about Banu Shayban and the leaders that Abu Bakr met with along with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Inshallah, that should be more than sufficient for today to cover. Alright, now, as far as his defense goes, this is one of his distinguished characters of Abu Bakr Siddiq. He was one of the courageous Sahaba. Even though, when we talked about, if you remember, his physique, we don't find physically he's very strong. He was lanky person, if you want to call him, to the point that his the door garment used to slip because he was so skinny. Now, but that did not prevent him to be courageous to the point that he was one of those people who was always there to protect Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there was a report by Urwa bin Zubayr radiallahu anhu. He said, he asked Amr bin As to tell me about the worst thing that the mushrikeen did to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, while Rasulullah was praying in Hajar al-Kaaba, Uqba bin Mu'ayt. Uqba bin Mu'ayt, by the way, he was a stepfather of Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anhu as well. He was a stepfather. Look at, they're all connected to each other. And even then, the behavior, because of, he was calling for Islam, how they behaved with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he came and he put his garment around his neck and he strangled him severely. Now Abu Bakr is the one, he intervened. He said, أَتَقْتُلُونَ رَجُلًا أَنْ يَقُولَ رَبِّيَ اللَّهِ, that are you going to kill a person just because he says, my Rabb is Allah Azza wa Jal? Is that the reason? And when Abu Bakr intervened, they left Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they started beating Abu Bakr now. See, that's the idea here. Abu Bakr was aware of what will be the consequences of intervening in this kind of situation. Yeah? And Abu Bakr intervened, and to protect Rasulullah, for him, that's the most important thing, to protect Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, Ibn Kathir reports that Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu mentioned about the incident. Then somebody asked to Sulaiman was addressing me, he said, "Oh people, who's the bravest among all people?" So one other person said, Amir al-Mu'minin, because he was the Khalifa at that time, Ali radiallahu anhu. So Ali said, he may be the one who has fought, and every battle he fought, he won. Okay? Whoever was enemy, he was able to take down his enemy. But he said, but in reality, if you want to know the real strong, the bravest among us was Abu Bakr Siddiq. And the reason he said that one time they made a hut for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the mushrikeen were going to attack at that time, one of the battles. And nobody wanted to be the one who is guarding Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they were aware of that kind of danger that you are putting yourself into. The only person who got up was Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu with his sword. And that's why he said he was the bravest people, he was the bravest person among us. Okay? So Abu Bakr, even though his physique may not be the one that people think of, but he was one of the bravest people. Okay. Alright, now when it comes to his spending for freeing the slaves, he freed, one of the reports talk about 7 different slaves, and Bilal was one of the famous ones that many of us are aware of. Bilal ibn Rabah. As a matter of fact, when we read any of the seerah books or history books where names of Sahaba are mentioned, and Bilal is just mentioned as Bilal, okay? There is no Bilal ibn Rabah mentioned for example. So the default is Bilal means Bilal Habashi or Bilal ibn Rabah. Because he was the most famous Bilal, even though there were other Bilal Muzini was another Bilal among the Sahaba, but he is the one we're talking about. Now Bilal, he was a slave of Umayyah bin Khalaf. And Umayyah bin Khalaf, he used to torture Bilal radiallahu anhu because of his acceptance of Islam. He would give it to the youth who would put the rope around his neck and drag him on the hot sand of the Mecca. And sometimes they would put a big stone on his chest while his back is lying on the hot sand of the desert of the Mecca. Now, Bilal, whenever he was tortured, he would say Ahadun Ahad, one to one, talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because that's oneness is the thing that they hated the most, the kuffar of the Mecca. And Bilal was saying the word that hurt the most. Now, after some time, Abu Bakr Siddiq, he saw the way Bilal was tortured. So he went to Umayyah bin Khalaf and he said, I have a slave who's stronger than Bilal, but he is of your religion. He's not a Muslim. Hence, why don't you exchange that? And another report talks about that. I think the other one I talk about that. That he also bought a certain amount of money, which is 10 dinar. Now, Umayyah bin Khalaf, he agreed because he was already getting sick of Bilal radiallahu anhu because he's a Muslim. Hence, he made the change. Now, one report talks about that, which is Abu Bakr came to Umayyah and he said, why don't you sell me this Bilal for 10 dinar? And Umayyah right away agreed. Umayyah asked for 10 dinar, Abu Bakr agreed right away. And Umayyah, he was like trying to ridicule Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. He said, you know, if you would have just bargained with me, I would have sold Bilal for a dinar. And the response of Abu Bakr to Umayyah was, and if you would have asked for 100 dinar, I would have paid 100 dinar. SubhanAllah. So he understood the worth of Bilal radiallahu anhu. So we're not talking about worth in the sense of the money, but the worth in the sense of his iman, that Abu Bakr was aware of that. And this is why even when he had a stronger slave or a servant that he was selling, and by the way, this is another thing that we know that when Islam came, the slavery was already prevalent in the society of the Meccans and around the world as well. And Islam is the one actually pretty much took care of the slavery, and hence we don't find, as one of the saying of Umar Khattab, he said, how can you make a person slave who's born free by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the womb of the mother? So now, here we're talking about the beginning of Islam, and that's a completely different subject of its own, how Islam took care of the slavery that existed. Now, Umayyah's response, Abu Bakr's response to Umayyah was, if you would have asked me for 100, I would have given you 100 dinar. A dinar is a big amount. Dinar is referred to as 4.25 grams of gold, and when you're talking about 100 dinar, you're talking about 450 grams or half a kilo of gold. Yeah. Okay. Now, lessons to learn from that. because this is something that we have to always, I like to do. Always try to connect it back to today's life as well, right? It's not the issue of just going through the stories and have no connection to our life here. Lesson to learn from Abu Bakr's freeing the slave is, look, Abu Bakr, first of all, did not force, even though he had the slave, to become Muslim. Yeah? Slave is referred as, in the past, as a commodity for the people. Yeah? Even then, Abu Bakr did not force him to become a Muslim even. Because Islam said, like Hafid, there is no compulsion in the deen. You cannot force somebody to become Muslim. Now, that's one thing. And Abu Bakr, when he freed Bilal radiallahu anhu, he bought him and he freed him. Right? It's not that he bought him so he can use him for himself or something. The purpose was that a person who has entered into the fold of Islam, to free him to become the slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a manner that he worship Allah the way he's supposed to be worshipped. Besides that, Abu Bakr also was a person who freed many of the slaves, including Amr bin Fuhaira. Amr bin Fuhaira was the Sahabi that we'll talk about next week probably, that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu freed him, and he is the one who helped Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Bakr, to migrate from Mecca to Medina. Okay? And Ubays, Zinnira Arumiya. There's quite a bit of a story, you know, very good. So Zinnira Arumiya was a Sahabiya who was beaten up by the master to the point that she became blind, and they used to make fun of her that it's because of Lat Uzza she became a blind person. While okay. Anyway, so I'm not going to go into details Zinnira Arumiya. Similarly, An-Nahdiya and her daughter was also freed by Abu Bakr Siddiq. That makes it 5 actually. The number wise it seemed like the 5 here, it's a total of 6, and including Bilal is now 7. And the 7th one was one of the female who was under the ownership of Bani Muhammad, and which was a clan of Bani Adi, ibn Ka'b. And Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, who was a mushrik at that time, who was a polytheist at that time, he used to beat her up, An-Nahdiya, okay? And beat her up to the point that he would get tired of beating her up. And he would say, I apologize to you, I only left you alone because I got tired. This was the extent of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. So as I remember the first talk when I was given here, one of the brothers asked the question that, how do you relate that to young kids, for example? Sometimes it becomes like, man, these are all nice stories and we cannot get there. The idea is, look at Umar radiallahu anhu. Prior to Islam, his situation, that he was in the ignorance, he is beating up a woman. And beating up a woman to the extent that he would get tired. The tiredness is the one that's making him to leave her alone. Yeah? And then the very same Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, after entering into the fold of Islam, his personality changed to the extent that during the night time of his Khilafah, he would be walking in the streets of the Medina to make sure that all the people, all the subjects that he has, they are protected, their needs are taken care of. Now, a great contrast, you see that a person, when he enters into the fold of Islam, how he changes, and prior to Islam as well. Yeah? Okay, so when we talk about Umar, inshallah, we can cover more. So these are the 7. As I said, mentioned here, these are 5 mentioned here, but here there are 2 of them actually, and Hadiya and her daughter, and Bilal was mentioned in the previous slide. So there are 7 people that was reported that Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu freed them. Now, a question to remember here is, something to remember here. Rasulullah when he was appointed as a prophet, his work was not geared towards the main purpose was, okay, today the work of the Islam is to just go and free the slaves. So as a group of the Muslims, that was not their job. Their job was to carry the Islam, the banner of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, to the point where they can implement the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. While on the other side, on an individual basis, like Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, we see that he is engaged in on an individual level in freeing the slaves. Yeah, so this is a difference between that an effort done by Rasulullah ﷺ as in a collective way, and on an individual level that you find that Rasulullah Abu Bakr and even other Sahaba, you find that they are engaged in these kind of activities to protect the individuals as well. Okay. Now, there was a time that Abu Bakr Siddiq, like many Sahaba, were going through difficult times. He wanted to migrate as well. Okay, and he was actually on his way to migration to migrate. And Ibn Daghina, who was a chief of the Al-Qara clan, he saw Abu Bakr leaving. So he's asked, "Where are you headed?" So Abu Bakr said, "My people have forced me to leave, so I am headed to a land where I may worship my Lord, Rabb, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." Now, the response of Ibn Daghina was very interesting. His response was almost same as the response of Khadija radiallahu anha that she gave to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he became a prophet. The first time when the wahi was revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the revelation was revealed, "Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq." And when he came back to Khadija radiallahu anha, very confused, in a state of anxiousness and all that. And Khadija was the wife who really calmed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She comforted him. And we find that Ibn Daghina said the very similar words. He said that if the people like Abu Bakr, they leave, he said they should not leave or be forced to leave. For you help the destitute, uphold his ties of kinship, sponsor orphans, honor guests, and help people who are struck by calamity. And he said, I am offering you my protection to go back and worship your Rabb in your own land. This hadith is reported by Imam Bukhari in the Sahih. Now, that's another aspect of this Abu Bakr, that Abu Bakr took the protection, he went back, and now there was Quraysh put a condition accepting the protection of Ibn Daghina. They said, we will accept your protection with one condition: Abu Bakr has to pray inside his house. Why? Because the Quran, the way Abu Bakr used to recite, he used to cry a lot during the recitation of the Quran. See, that recitation of the Quran, the impact that Abu Bakr had, that could have impacted other people. This is why the Quraysh did not want Abu Bakr to recite the Quran in front of the people. Okay? So Abu Bakr went in first, he stayed inside, and then he came out in his courtyard, whatever you call it, outside the house, and he kind of made a place for himself to pray, and he started reciting the Quran up loud. Now, while he's reciting loudly, that was people started gathering around and listening to Abu Bakr, what he's reciting. The Quran, they already was afraid of the impact of the Quran. Now, Quraysh went back to Ibn Daghina and they said, well, look, we accept your protection with condition. Abu Bakr is breaking the condition. Abu Bakr said that, that you can keep your protection, I don't need your protection. Okay? And hence, Ibn Daghina, he took the protection back. Now, there are a few things to learn here. One, the tribal society, if they would give somebody protection those days, they would have taken care of the protection no matter what. Okay? The whole tribe would protect. It's not the issue of Ibn Daghina is the one who's standing outside Abu Bakr's house. No, it's the issue of the whole tribe of Ibn Daghina, his clan, would be fighting on the behalf of Abu Bakr if somebody would have harmed Abu Bakr Siddiq. So they used to honor this kind of a protection. That's one thing. Second lesson to learn. Look, Abu Bakr, when he was reading the Quran was revealed in the language of the Quraysh. And for the Quraysh, for them, the Quran, as they were reciting, they understood what the Quran was saying. Hence, it was really impacting them right away. Now, nowadays, we see that sometimes people start crying while they're reciting the Quran. But Abu Bakr, for him, it was a natural, I'm not saying it's not natural for people today, but in general, for him, it was a natural thing. And the kuffar were very scared of this, that Abu Bakr would recite, not only recite, while he's reciting in a very impactful manner, he's impacted and he's impacting others. Hence they want to prevent Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu to recite the Quran in front of the people. And Abu Bakr, he did not care about his protection, his life or something, and he said no, he's going to do what he has to do. As we talked about last week as well, Abu Bakr did what? He is the first person who openly proclaimed Islam among the people, and hence he was beaten up. Yeah? Okay. Now, another thing that happened in the time of with Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, or in the Meccan era, when the da'wah of Islam was spreading, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that move on from just proclaiming people towards Islam, rather for the Meccans only, rather now you start going to the other tribes as well. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to meet people. When the people were coming for the Hajj, he used to meet them, and then other places he went to those tribes as well. And a very famous story was about Banu Shayban bin Tha'laba. This tribe is the one that Ali mentions, the whole narration, and he says like this: but Allah ordered His Prophet to present himself to Arab tribes. He left, and I went with him. Okay, now remember one thing here. Rasulullah ﷺ's life that we study, he was following the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he was proclaiming the message first to his close relatives, and then he was proclaiming the da'wah openly, and then the third step we see in the Meccan era was he went to different tribes. As Ali is saying, when Allah commanded Rasulullah ﷺ to go to the different tribes, so this step of going to different tribes to call them towards Islam was part of the command of Allah Azza wa Jal. So Rasulullah was driven by the wahi to act like that. Okay? Now, so he mentioned the story that we went to a gathering, and Abu Bakr asked, who are these people? So they said, they are from Bani Shayban, Ibn Tha'laba. And Abu Bakr turned to Rasulullah and said, may my father and mother be sacrificed for you. These are the noblest people among them. And he mentioned the names. And those people were Mafruq bin Amr, Hani bin Qabisa, Al-Musanna bin Al-Haritha, and U'man bin Sharik. So these four people were the leaders among the Banu Shayban. Now, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam approached the leaders of those tribes because that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him. And those are the ones who have the authority to give to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he was looking for authority from them so he can implement the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, so first they met Mafruq ibn Amr, who was sitting close to Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr said to him, how many are you? And Mafruq said, we are 1,000, talking about soldiers in numbers. And 1,000 is not defeated because it is lacking in numbers. Then Abu Bakr said, how strong are you? But Mafruq said, we are never as angry as we are when we meet our enemy, and we never fight as fiercely as we do when we are angry. We prefer good horses to children and weapons to the power, meaning for food. Okay? So this is the strength that he was talking about. And then say, as for victory, it comes from Allah. He subhanahu wa ta'ala grants it to us one time, and he subhanahu wa ta'ala grants it against the next time. Perhaps you are the brother of Quraysh. He said, okay, so you are the people from Quraysh. And Abu Bakr said, yes. So Mafruq said, look, the brother of Quraysh, what do you, and he want to talk to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, oh brother of Quraysh, what do you invite us? He asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, I invite you to testify, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Basically, there's nobody worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as he has no partners, and he is the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he also said, I invite you to grant me shelter and support me. Shelter and support me here means to protect me and support me to implement the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because the Quraysh has united against us, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and has disbelieved in Allah and His Messenger. So now, Mafruq said, by Allah, you are invited to the noblest manner and the best of deeds. Those people have disbelieved in you, and you have united against you, and lied you, and are false. Then he said, but this matter that you're talking about, it's not that one meeting that we meet and then this is sufficient for us. And he said, okay, we have to meet Hani ibn Qabisa, one of the Shaykh, one of the leaders among the Banu Shayban. Now they met Hani, and Hani said, I heard whatever you said, brother Quraysh, and yet I feel that leaving our religion and following yours just based on this short, small meeting that we had, that will be short-sightedness. Remember, I was talking about Abu Bakr. When Abu Bakr accepted Islam as an individual, there was thinking and pondering that he has done. Now, when Rasulullah offered Islam to Banu Shayban, they did not want to be hasty. At the same time, he said, okay, but I want you to meet one of our leaders, Al-Muthanna bin al-Harith. Now, Al-Muthanna was a general. Think of it as an army general for them. He is Shaykh, who is in charge of us during the war. And Muthanna, by the way, he became Muslim later on. Not only became Muslim, he was one of the key figures who fought against the Persians and opened the Iraq, along with other Sahaba, but Al-Muthanna was the main person because he was aware of the people of Iraq. Now, a discussion happened between him and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, concerning the leaving the religion and following yours is the same answer that Hani gave you. We chose as our home territory the life between two Sayran. A Sayran, he referred to two rivers, and Al-Yamama and the other is Samawa. And he said, because of we live by the Persians and we need their protection, and we will not be able to fight against them because they had a treaty along with them. They were allies. And they said, okay, we can probably talk like this, but the only problem is we will not be able to fight against the Persians for you. And Rasulullah said, look, your answer is not totally negative because you have been honest. However, the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be supported only by those who guard it from all directions. Whoever gives the support, Rasulullah asked for support. Look, he expected the support from Banu Shayban. It's not that Banu Shayban was not capable. He understood the capability. The idea was they were not offering complete support to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam rejected that kind of a support. He said it has to be from all sides. And then he met An-Nu'man ibn Sharid. And he said, indeed, we should do that, O man of Quraysh, because he said, Rasulullah said to him, that suppose that the only short period of time passes before Allah makes you inheritor of that land, the one that you're scared of, the Syria, the Kisra, which is the Persian land, the Iraq and all those lands. And Nu'man, when he heard that, indeed, we shall do that. If that's the case, when it happens, that time that would be very great for us. But at this point, they reject. Now, the lessons that we can learn from this story, there are many lessons. Some of them, Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, number one, he supported Islam in many ways, by his wealth, by his body, the way it could be used for, his knowledge, and his all sorts of talents. So one of the talents that he had was the talent of genealogy. As Rasulullah talked about him, he is the most knowledgeable when it comes to the knowledge about genealogy. Which person, how many people belong in which tribe, and which tribe is stronger than the other tribe, these kind of things. And that was very useful when Rasulullah was looking for the support. And then the second lesson to learn here is Rasulullah along with Abu Bakr and Ali, they did not make a compromise. Look, compared to this today with the Muslims, Muslims are ready to make all sorts of compromises left and right. Even for the situation of Gaza was happening to the point it has been flattened. And you will find that many of so-called the leaders who are giving in and thinking of, oh, we have to give in something or give up something, and continuously giving up the land of the Muslim to these colonialist nations. Now, Rasulullah, even though he could have become the ruler there, and say, okay, Persia will take care of later. And he already talked about, if you think about it, that they will rule over them in a short period of time, like 10 years or so. And in the time of Abu Bakr, they were able to take over. Okay? But Rasulullah did not make a compromise even in that case. He said, You will only accept it if it is for protection from all sides. Okay. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sorry, H, I don't know where you come from. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed that about 10 or more years later, it would be the Banu Shayban tribe who, after they became Muslim, would be the first to fight against the very king they once feared, which was the Kisra, which was the Persian, was Sassanid or Persian Empire, which was referred as. And they were able to beat them, and they were able to conquer the land by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's all I have today. Inshallah, next week we'll talk about a little bit about Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj and the migration of Abu Bakr and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Okay, if there's any questions or comments, inshallah, we'll try to